Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. This is Jessa. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me. I apologize if you can hear the lawn people outside in my neighborhood cutting the grass. That's what I get for recording at home today. Anyway, I come every week trying to share interesting topics and conversations with you. I love this part of my job. I so enjoy putting this podcast together because I get to talk to fascinating people, and I'm just really interested in all these conversations. Today, we're going to be talking about sexual authenticity. And, it's maybe those are simple words, but basically at its heart, how do we really understand what it is we want and need in sex? How do we be that person? How do we know ourselves? How do we communicate that to any partner that we might have? How do we let ourselves have and enjoy what it is we want out of sex? And, how do we collaborate with another person who also has the right to be sexually authentic? That's the conversation today. My guest is Domina Franco, who is a sex educator, coach, and writer. She's based in New York, as you're going to hear, because you're going to hear the sounds of Manhattan in the background a little bit. I guess we've got lawn care in Seattle and ambulances and horns and motorcycles in New York City. Anyway, a meeting of the worlds. She's wonderfully entertaining and informative, and we really had a wonderful conversation. I hope it opens up some doors for you. Enjoy. The Better Sex Podcast is brought to you by the Sex Without Stress online course. It's a course for couples to escape the cycle of disappointment, avoidance, and pressure in your sex life. So if you're in a pretty good relationship, there's a lot of love and goodwill, but sex is your struggle, this could be for you. You work in the privacy of your own home and at your own pace to create a sex life you can both look forward to. If you want to learn more, go to sexwithoutstress.com/program. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I guess we'll say right away that the background noise is because you're doing this from New York City. Right?
I am, and like I said, there's no private space in New York, really.
Right. No, we get the atmosphere, right?
The atmosphere of Soho. You can just imagine fabulous me in Soho somewhere. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I want to start by asking you just to define sexual authenticity. I mean, I think people probably know what both those words mean separately, but I'd be curious for you to just sort of address what you mean by that.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I think there's a caveat to start off with that definition could be very different from person to person.
Yes.
Because all of our experiences are so very different. But I think to me, sexual authenticity in a more general and applicable way to define it would be that it's approaching your sexuality in a way that is actually really true to your desires and that is honoring what you need and want and your boundaries. So I think that's those are sort of the major points to sexual authenticity as far as I'm concerned. And it requires a lot of honesty with yourself as well as with others. I think people initially think about sexual authenticity as being honest with people and talking to people about what you need. But you have to be able to do that with yourself, as well. And I think more often than not, people also struggle with that,
Yeah. So how common is a struggle with sexual, in with sexual authenticity? Like what kinds of things get in people's way, and how pervasive is the struggle?
I think it's really so much more common than people think. From my work, and I work with people all over the world, mostly via social media, but I also do like guest lecturing at universities and workshops and whatnot. But a lot of my stuff is done via social media and private coaching. And it's almost always at the crux of every problem that somebody might have. Like, the truth is their problem might be yada, yada, but the symptom is an issue with sexual authenticity, you know, and it's generally that they're afraid to hurt people's feelings that they're partnered with, or they're scared to ask what they want for because of social normative practices or, you know, stigmas that are surrounding their sexual interests. A lot of it stems from stigma and from social norms, which I feel like are so poisonous in like so many ways.
Right.
But yeah, there can be so many problems, but they almost always at the crux of them start with sexual authenticity, you know, and the kind of courage that's required to break out of that.
Right. Yeah. Overcoming the stigma, overcoming the shame. I mean, you didn't use that word, but I think of sexual shame is so pervasive for people, right? Like it's really.
It's incredibly pervasive. And I mean, we're also, I mean, I don't know about yourself, but I know just based on the fact that, you know, I live in North America, I live in it's a very privileged place to live in, to be able to live in New York, right? And I am a white person and I'm a cisgendered person. I have a lot of privileges that make it easy, quote unquote, easy for me to be sexually authentic in many ways, right? Because society deems what I do relatively okay. Except that I also have the intersections of, you know, of being a queer person.
Right.
And, you know, society's not so up on that, even though I'm so amazed that like it's you know, we're speaking in June. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but you know, it's Pride Month and even the banks have like rainbow windows right now. And I'm like, wow, that's different to 20 years ago. That wasn't happening 20 years ago. But yeah. And then also my background was sex work. So, you know, that's certainly, I talk a lot about that sort of stigma, because of course that's a criminalized activity. So that's, you know, even more so than just culturally stigmatized. It's also legally stigmatized.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've spoken to this a little bit, but why is authenticity so important in our sexuality? Like what, you know?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, in my experience, I've experienced a lot of people that are dissatisfied with their sexuality not dissatisfied with their sexuality, but dissatisfied with how it's playing out in their life.
Yeah.
They're not at all dissatisfied with their fantasies. They love their,
but their actual sex life or their relationship or something like that.
Many people love their fantasies. Some people struggle even with their fantasies, and that's also part of sexual authenticity.
Right.
But I think it's so important because the thing is that if we cannot find a way to work towards sexual authenticity, and I'm not saying every person's going to be like, oh, I'm so free, you know, I can choose to do whatever I want to do that's consensual and good for me and fun for me. No, we're all going to be at different places and we're all going to be at different spots. But if we can't find a way to rejoice in what we desire, if we can't find a way to rejoice in what we desire, and we can't find a way to be at peace with what we desire, if it comes up against social norms, which honestly a lot of sexuality does, depending upon our cultural context and our cultural lens, right? If we can't do that, we're sort of almost like in this kind of blasé sexual purgatory at best, and honestly, a kind of a sexual hell at worst, where we're totally unsatisfied, or we're actually traumatizing ourselves by you know, allowing things to happen that we don't want to happen, right? Or or by acquiescing to things we're not really interested in, that actually, like, you know, sex and sexuality is so much about connection between the people involved. But if you're doing things that you don't really want to do, you actually are inherently almost kind of disassociating from something, because you're like, I don't really want to do this thing. So even if you are somewhat, you know, quote unquote, defined present during the act, you are in a way disconnected. And
You're disconnecting from something, right? Some part of yourself, your partner, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. You're disconnecting from something. And that is, like, I feel very pervasive. It's like black mold in a house, you know, I think it spreads very quickly. So, yeah.
What's striking to me is, as I'm thinking about this, it's not like my thoughts are totally organized, but like authenticity has all these layers, because we have to know what we want and what we don't want, right? There's that self-knowledge. Then there's the speaking up about it.
Oh, yeah.
And the doing it. And then there's letting yourself have the experience. Like, even if you're doing it and you've asked for it, you may not relax enough to just enjoy it. I mean, you know,
and you probably won't relax enough to enjoy it the first time or the first few times, you know, because you're getting acclimated to this very radical and courageous act, you know? And I don't think people give themselves enough credit for, you know, deciding, I'm going to have what I want, you know, in my sexual life. That's a hugely courageous move. Like, it's such a cool thing to do, you know? And I think people don't always give themselves credit for doing that. But you're right. Like, there's so many layers to it. Like, how do you get through all of the layers and then at the tail end, be happy about it, you know, or content or aligned with it, right? Like, how do you stay aligned, or how do you get aligned with it? Like, once you've gone through the, you know, the obstacle course of sexual authenticity. That should be like the title of my next book. Exactly. Or my first book. I haven't read the book. What am I talking about? Yeah, you know, the first thing is knowing, what do I like? What do I want? And sometimes that takes a lot of cultural unpacking, because, you know, we grow up in certain, perhaps spiritual backgrounds or political backgrounds, or just even folks who don't grow up in perhaps more conservative places can still totally have sexual hang-ups. You know, it's not, you know, solely the place of, you know, the conservative religious background that has hang-ups. Hello. There's a million people that have hang-ups. You know, you have to get in touch with what you want, and you have to get in touch with that enough to even speak it, to like put it out into the universe. And to speak it out into the universe, even to, like, say, an online forum, and then to try to do that to another living human being. Oh my God. right. And then even more, let's up the ante even more, to say that to a living human being who's really important to you, and whose opinion of you could be really make or break to a lot of your esteem of yourself, you know? So, you know, and then of course there's the whole, like, learning, like, maybe you don't know how to do this thing you want to do yet. Right. Yeah. And then if you F that up somehow, right? If you mess that one up, then you maybe feel silly, or you don't want to try it again because you've, you know, quote unquote messed up. By the way, like, I would just like to, you know, have all of your listeners think back to the first 1 or 2 times that they, you know, got intimate with somebody, and tell me if they did it really, really well. Like,
I mean, I say this in my sex therapy practice, right? Like, we have to earn comfort with things. We start uncomfortable. We have to practice. Exactly. We're not supposed to, like, know what we're doing with any of this.
No, God. I mean, no, we definitely don't. And like, you can also, you know, you can be sort of well-versed in one aspect of something and want to, like, say you're trying out BDSM, which for folks who are listening who may not know that, that's like kink practices, bondage, discipline, sadomasochism. So, like, say you're like, ooh, you know, we've tried handcuffs and blindfolds, but now we'd like to move to impact implements like paddles or floggers, right? Like, those actually take skills. You have to have skills to know how to use them safely, right?
Right.
Or you want to try bondage, right? Like, okay, so maybe you start like bondage 101 with some scarves. You know, you don't go to shibari with like rope first, you know? Babies don't run marathons, you know? So
right.
I think people are also very hard on themselves in that aspect, in the aspect of thinking that they really have to know how to do something. And then they also have to like stave off feeling silly if they haven't done it like the right way the first time,
right.
you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as you're talking about this, it's occurring to me how much courage this takes. And in some of our back and forth setting this up, you're talking about courage as well as authenticity. I can see how these go together, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, they are absolutely part and parcel. They are absolutely intertwined, because you can't be authentic without courage. And authenticity literally is a courageous act. And yeah, it's all interwoven. It's kind of like six or half a dozen, you know, but they aren't exactly the same thing, because courage is the feeling, the spark, the ignition, but the authenticity is the practice and the plan.
Right.
You know? So, and I just came up with that one. I had not written that down before. I feel like I should write that down.
Well, you can listen to this later and take notes.
Yeah, I'll have to transcribe my own whatever. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the authenticity is the plan in action, but the courage has to be there to even have the plan occur. Right. You know, so like, what do you do if you have all these desires and you have all these wants and needs, you know, and maybe you have a willing partner, but you just don't know you do yet, right? Like maybe you do, you know, and you have to float the idea past them. And maybe you have to float like a PG rated version of it first, you know? I think I find this a lot with clients who are into kinkier practices. But again, everything's relative, because somebody's flogging and needle play is somebody else's doggy style, right?
Yeah, right.
So, and I really hate when people like quote unquote vanilla shame, you know, people like, and they think like, oh, they sort of are like, oh, really? That's such a big deal for you? It might be for someone.
Yeah.
It might be like receiving oral sex for someone who has a vulva, vagina. That might be a huge, courageous step for them to be willing to accept pleasure that way. Where some other people might be like, yeah, go downtown, get there.
Well,
take the express train, please. You know,
providing oral sex might be a really big deal to anyone, any gender, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Very, very big steps, right? So no judgment or hierarchy here of sexual desires, right? That's
no. I think that's first of all, that's just kind of pointless, because like none of it applies to everybody. There's no hard and fast rule. So judging ourselves on something that we would do or that we wouldn't do is counterintuitive. It actually, like, the languages don't match up. It doesn't matter. Right. You know, so it's just like, just focus on yourself and being kind to yourself and saying like, hey, I deserve to be fulfilled. I think at the end of the day, that's that's always my biggest takeaway, is like, you deserve to be able to just be.
Yeah.
And you deserve to be able to be your whole self.
Right.
And, you know, unfortunately, like, there is sometimes fallout from that. Sometimes people's relationships alter in such a way that it's so deep and it ends up ending a relationship, or it changes one very drastically, or it strengthens it. You know, you have to roll the dice. But you have to decide, right? Am I going to roll this dice and take this risk, or am I going to stay somewhere safe and maybe not be so satisfied?
Right. Or authentic. Know? I mean, hence the courage, right? It is a risk,
right,
because you don't know how it's going to be received.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love that quote. And someone incredibly famous said it, and I can't remember, but courage is not the absence of fear. You know, it's probably a president or a general or something who said right. it, right? Wait, was it Winston Churchill? Maybe, I have no idea. Anyway,
I can't remember.
Somebody will reference it, but yeah, it's, you know, courage is not the absence of fear. It's doing something in the presence of fear.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
So I wish when I see these like tender-hearted people who really want something for themselves, and I'm such a mushball, like my whole heart goes out to them because I just think like, you can have this thing. You can have what you want, or most likely you can work towards what you want, I really always just so hope that they can find the place to find the little mustard seed of courage, Yeah.
So how does someone become more sexually authentic? Like, I don't know if is there a process you walk people through or are there...
Yeah, I mean, it's not a hard and fast process, but I think I love giving people homework. Maybe, I am an educator after all, but, so I do love giving people homework. And what I love to do is I love to have them write out, what would your dream sex life be? Don't think about your partner right now. Don't think about your circumstance, your current circumstance, your current relationship structures. Don't think about your past. Think about if your sex life could just look exactly how you wanted it to. Write me out a few vignettes. Tell me, what does that look like? Be as descriptive as you like. Or if it's a bullet point list, do it that way. Whatever makes sense to the person. Or if they want to record it as a voice memo, like whatever, method works for them. And for them to sort of daydream, because a lot of people don't even let themselves daydream about what could be possible. So when they start with that and then we talk again, I usually ask them, okay, well, what ones of these do you think are feasible considering whatever your situation is? Like maybe they're single, and they want to do this or that. Well, okay, they need to find someone to do that with, right?
Right.
Someone lovely and safe and hot to go do that with. Or maybe they're partnered and they are going to have a conversation with their partner. So that's like the next step, right? Is like, okay, how can I go about this conversation so I can say what I mean without being mean? I can be kind. I can be honest and really make myself heard, and some people have said, like I get so flustered. I can't have a conversation about this face to face with my partner. Even people who have been with their partners for years can sometimes feel that way. And, so sometimes writing letters, they've been able to write a letter or an email to their partner, or sometimes I'm like, okay, let's lighten it up. Like maybe we don't make this a direct ask, right? Like maybe we make this a game, right? And not to be manipulative because we're all talking about authenticity here, but to be like, say to your partner, like, hey, we've been together for a while. Let's see what's going on. Like, let's take our temperature, let's take a stock and an inventory and see if there's any new inventory we want to put in here, like what do we want to add to the menu? I'm always like thinking about it like it's a restaurant,
Right.
Maybe they do it in a more playful way. Like not that there's anything wrong with what's going on now, but what can we add, or what can we tailor? Maybe I like doing this, but I want to do it slightly differently. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing about authenticity too, is that it comes in so many different forms. It could be asking for something totally new. It could be asking for something to change a little.
Right.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Jessa here, taking just a quick break. Thanks for listening so far. I wanted to let you know about the sex quiz that I've put together called How Healthy is Your Sex Life? I've taken a close look at the typical ways that I see couples get into trouble with sex, including avoidance, neglect, negativity, distraction, and boredom. And the free quiz will score your individual results based on these factors. And then I provide my recommendations and ideas, including my top 10 sex tips, which will help you make instant improvement. If you'd like to take the quiz and see how healthy your sex life is, you can do it right now at sexhealthquiz.com.
And so how do we have, you're talking a little bit already about how we have these conversations with our partner, but we also have to we're dealing with another person whose sexual authenticity also matters, right? Like you're
completely.
Individual. So like how
does it ever work?
And how do we go in with, a mutual exploration?
Yes. Well, that's a whole other part of the process, like I think like we were talking about it. First, you have to get to know what you want, and you have to be able to verbalize it. And that's why I always say we can say what we mean without being mean. I think it's really easy to remember that whoever we're partnered with or partners with, for people who might be in, multi-partner relationships, right? Those people have whole, hearts and souls, and those people have sexual histories and they have hang-ups about their bodies and they have all their own, like, very multi-layered histories. And I think we have to approach them with the same level of kindness we were approaching ourselves. And maybe even more so, because when we approach ourselves, we at least know what's going on in our heart or our head, right?
We know what the minefield, or at least we're more likely to
we're
know.
More likely. Yeah, we may never know. There's a lot of parts of myself that I'm pretty sure I have no idea what's going on there. Yeah, you almost have to be even more kind and patient and cognizant of what you're saying to somebody else, because you're not in their head and you haven't had even if they've told you their experiences, even if you've been with them for like 50 years and you know all this stuff about them, you may still not know these places where they get like really tender and hurt because they may never have told you any of that. So I think always approaching those conversations in a collaborative way. This is what I often tell people. It's like, approach it in a collaborative way. Like say like, hey, is there anything that you wish we would have done or could do? Or do you have like a wish list, a bucket list? I often try to make it, interspersed with humor, because I often feel that like lightening it up makes it less tense, and I also think kind of having those conversations, they're so contextual and situational, like, maybe don't have that conversation with someone when they've had like a really rough week at work, Yeah, not a great idea to have that conversation after you've just had like a really intense weekend with the in-laws, like maybe not, right?
I would also say don't have that conversation immediately after sex.
Oh, completely.
Completely. Right?
Oh, yeah. No. And that's exactly it. You shouldn't have that conversation. Maybe, okay, if you're having one glass of wine, but don't have that conversation high. Don't have that conversation drunk. Don't have that conversation right after sex, because it will immediately look like a report card. Right. And depending upon the grading, that could really shut someone down, or it could then shut you down because you tried to have the conversation and the person like put a block on it, and then you're almost even farther away from the person than you were before. And you're even further away from ever taking courageous steps than you were before. So setting up the timing of the conversation, the space that the conversation's going to be in, I think, it's pretty important to have that conversation fully clothed. And it's probably, important to have that conversation pretty fully clothed and maybe in a very like emotionally neutral environment,
Yeah. And it's likely going to be more than one conversation. Right?
Oh yeah. It's not one conversation.
Yeah. I just happened today to have recorded an episode of my own thinking about exploring eroticism, or, ourselves and then with our partner. And I think this overlaps. And I usually suggest that people talk about what's erotic to them and understand what's erotic to their partner with curiosity and understanding, separate from any conversation about what we're going to actually do with this information. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Who am I and who is my partner? Let's understand that first before we start negotiating or collaborating or deciding which part of this are we going to put into physical practice versus which part is going to be fantasy material.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that's kind of been helpful for some of the people that I've coached is them thinking back to like sort of origin stories of where they think some of their pleasures or their desires have come from, like maybe where did these things come from? Because that's really intriguing. And that's, people feel seen when they're heard.
Mm-hmm.
People feel connective when they're seen. So it's very much like we were talking about, authenticity and courage are like very intertwined, but you kind of need courage to be authentic, and the same thing is true of all these things. Like, you kind of need to know, why did someone get into this, or why are they into this, so that you can fully appreciate it, and because if you appreciate it, you're much more likely to actually like be supportive of the exploration of whatever that is.
Right.
And we're talking about this in very paired up, we're talking about this in very coupled ways. And I know we still have a little while to go to chat, but I just want to make sure that people who are not partnered,
right,
don't feel left out of the conversation here, like, because they can do their self-exploration of what turns them on, what they need, but then God, they have to try to relay that to someone totally new, right? Like who they're dating or who they're seeing or who they're just playing with, and they may have to do that. Oh my God. I mean, they may have to do that over and over and over again with different people and getting all these different responses. It's like, it takes a lot of courage to like be a pole vaulter, to run with that pole and try to get over that thing. Right. And like, you're going to probably bite it a few times, like you're probably going to end up with a number of bruises and you're probably going to bite it a few times. But you have to keep running with the pole to ever get over the pole vault.
Well, and you get better with practice and you get stronger with practice. I would get more authentic.
Yeah. Okay. And also I also think you do get a little bit more courageous the more you do it, because you're sort of like, what do I have to lose at this point? Like, because once you realize that you won't die from embarrassment, once you realize that you won't die from putting it out there, you can start to be like, oh, okay. And I mean, of course, I think I also always press to the folks who are not partnered up to still be cognizant of who they're sharing things with, because you want to make sure that who you're sharing something with, especially if it's like a deep and like maybe pretty private thing for you, you want to make sure that whoever you're sharing that with, first of all, has earned the right to know that from you, and that they're a safe and good person, both physically and emotionally, because you can't just be like, hey, I really want to try this thing. I've been on 2 dates with this person. And you just, sort of spit it out. That can actually be detrimental, I think.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could come up with an example or two, obviously without giving away any clients' information. So I don't know if you sort of want to make things up that are representative of the kinds of journeys towards authenticity that you've witnessed or been a part of, that would illustrate a little of this.
Yeah, I can certainly talk about people in a very anonymous way. There'd be no markers about who these people would be. But I had a client, a cis woman who had vaginismus, and she was a virgin. And we could get into how virginity is a construct.
Right.
I just want to make sure that everybody knows that Domina Franco believes that virginity is a social construct.
Right.
Please refer to my Instagram page.
Yeah.
No. So she had not had penetrative vaginal and penis sex. Right. And she had vaginismus on top of that. So that made things way more complicated. And she came from a very religious Judeo-Christian background. And she really needed help even believing that it was okay to have sex. Mm. And she, for a long time, the first thing I did, of course, was, I told her to go talk to her gyno, about possibly working with dilators, like looking at the physical aspects of it that I don't cover clearly, right? She ended up working with someone, a pelvic floor specialist. She was just dating this person at the time. They're still dating. I said, he can't show up for you if he doesn't know what you're going through. And he also had not made his sexual debut yet either. Okay. Right. And he also was from a Judeo-Christian background. So they but they wanted to have sex. They'd been going out for a while and they decided that was something they wanted to do. And so they were kind of also like fighting, swimming against the stream of their cultural backgrounds, right? And so he also was never pressing her, which was very sweet and kind of him. She ended up working with a pelvic floor specialist that helped her a lot. And there's also this fantastic product called O-Nut. And I ended up suggesting that to her. And that also helped. And they were actually able to have penis and vagina penetrative sex. And she just said, like, wow, it had never occurred to me. He can't show up for me if I don't tell him what I'm going through. She was like, I just figured like he would just show up and do what I needed him to do. And I was like, how would he even know what to do?
So for her, part of the authenticity was being honest about the struggles she was having. Yeah. Right? Like the pain, the fear, the cultural training. I mean, to let somebody in on that.
Yeah, it was super deep for her, and then, I've had other clients where, where some of them, they aren't successful. That's a really lovely success story and that's very heartwarming. But then there's a lot where, it's not that they're not in their pursuit of their authenticity here, but it might not have worked. But for all the lovely cases, and where people really make these amazing strides, there's also people where like this one man, his wife shamed him when he started talking about the fact that he liked wearing women's underwear.
Right.
And he took the chance to tell her about it.
Yeah.
And he did it very incrementally. He tried to talk to her about kink first, and she seemed a little open to that. So then he was like, okay, maybe I can talk to her about this, and she even seemed open to like impact play and bondage. Right. But then the thing is that the forced feminization was like the biggest and most important thing for him.
Right.
And he mentioned that, and she didn't respond. She didn't respond in a way that helped.
Right.
And it really drove him back, a number of steps. And, he just was like, okay, I'm just going to have to do that on my own or not do it at all. And they had made such progress. I was just so excited. I thought this is going to go, and it just didn't, and sometimes it doesn't. I had to remind him like, but you did it. Like you asked for it.
Right. He got that courage. He knows himself.
And I said, I know it might suck right now. And I know that this doesn't feel good that, your wife is willing to do these other things with you, but now you actually feel less connected to her because of this, because you feel like shamed in a way, right? Yeah. Or not even in a way. He just felt shamed.
Right.
I said, but you did it, which is so huge. And I had to remind him that, also not every partner is going to be okay with everything you want to do. And you also have to accept that it's also okay for the partner to say, I'm not into that.
Yeah.
And that you have to also accept that. And that's also part of authenticity, is letting other people be authentic.
Right.
And honoring what's true for them as well. Like, because we don't just do this in a vacuum. This doesn't just we don't just run rampant in our authenticity, being as authentic as we want, like we said, there's, it's in relation to other people, and we have to understand that they also have all their own stuff and all their own path and process,
Yeah, and certainly, in my practice, I work almost exclusively with couples. So I'm trying to facilitate conversations like this to avoid shaming each other and villainizing or pathologizing each other.
Yeah.
How do I help each person find their truth and express that? And hopefully they can put that together in a way that's satisfying for both of them. Right.
Right.
And some things may not be on the menu, but hopefully they can still be authentic.
Yeah. I mean, you as a person, I use the restaurant. I use the restaurant metaphor a lot.
Right.
I'm like, look, you probably like burgers or you like vegetarian food, you like Indian food, right? Like maybe you like Chinese food, right? Like there's a lot of different restaurants you could be into. French food, right? Italian. Hello. How could I forget Italian? Right. But at the Italian restaurant, you're probably not going to find egg rolls, right? You might not find egg rolls. Doesn't mean that like egg rolls aren't delicious. And it also doesn't mean that just because the Italian restaurant doesn't have egg rolls, that what they don't have is delicious, right? And that's a lot easier for folks who are polyamorous and ethically non-monogamous, who can, find different partners and metamors,
Right.
to satisfy their own or their partner's needs. But for folks who are more monogamous relationships, I think we have to sort of like look at it like, okay, well, what do I want?
Mm-hmm.
And our partner is not the Italian restaurant or the Chinese restaurant. Our partner is going on a date with us. Like, can we go to the Chinese food restaurant tonight? Can we go to the Italian restaurant tonight?
Yeah.
Our partner is not just one thing either. We're not one thing. Nobody is that 2D, Yeah. So, I mean, what I always think is so awesome is like, I feel like you win the lottery when you figure out the thing you both like,
Exactly. Find the overlap, at least it's easy to play there.
Oh my God, get in that Venn diagram and find the overlap, Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Great. Would you just say a word about where people could find you if they want to get in touch or follow you or connect with your coaching?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm on Instagram a lot. That is where I do a lot of the work that I do. And that is my name. It's Domina and then underscore and then Franco. But people can also find me on my website, which is just www.dominafranco.com. So dominafranco.com. Keep it pretty simple.
Right.
And people can always reach out for sessions or consultation that way. And on my Instagram, I do a Q&A Monday. So people can always ask some questions on a Monday. And I try to get around to as many as I can. I can't always get around to everybody, but yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I'll put all that information in the show notes too. So it's
wonderful
simple for people to link over and get in touch.
Yes.
Well, great. Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's really been a pleasure having the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think these are really important conversations to have, and I'm so happy that you're like making sure people have these conversations.
I'm certainly trying. Yeah. So
yeah, great. Let's change the world. Let's make the world a better place, right? One orgasm at a time.
Exactly. Totally.
Okay.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.